"Sir, that boy lived with me in the orphanage," the black cleaner cried out when she saw his portrait. The Harrington estate was the kind of place that made people feel small. Every corridor stretched impossibly long, lined with priceless art and antiques that whispered of old money and older secrets. The marble floors gleamed like mirrors under crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. To the staff who worked there, it was a palace of quiet labor, where every surface had to shine and every mistake could cost you your job. But to Elena Brooks, a humble cleaner with gentle hands and a heart that had survived more than anyone knew, it was simply a place where she could earn enough to survive another month. She'd been working at the estate for 6 months now, moving through rooms like a ghost, touching nothing she shouldn't, speaking only when spoken to, making herself as invisible as possible, because that's what people in her position did to keep their jobs. But that afternoon, while dusting the billionaire's private study, Elena's carefully constructed invisibility shattered in the most unexpected way. She saw a portrait on the wall, newly hung, of a young boy with warm brown eyes and a shy smile that she recognized instantly. The feather duster slipped from her trembling hands as 25 years of buried memories came flooding back. Her knees went weak, and tears she'd held back for decades suddenly spilled down her cheeks as she whispered words she never thought she'd say out loud. "Sir, that boy lived with me in the orphanage." The billionaire, Jonathan Harrington, who had just entered the study, froze in his tracks, and when she turned to face him with recognition dawning in her tear-filled eyes, he spoke 3 words that would change both their lives forever. "That boy was me." Before we dive into this incredible story, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is in your location. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because the stories we share aren't just entertainment, they're reminders that some connections are too powerful for time or distance to break. Now, let's go back to the beginning and see how 2 lost souls found their way back to each other. Elena had woken up that Tuesday morning the same way she'd woken up every morning for the past 6 months. At 4:45, 15 minutes before her alarm, because her body was so used to surviving on minimal sleep that it had stopped trusting clocks. Her studio apartment was small enough that she could see the entire space from her bed, kitchenette with a hot plate and mini fridge, bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, a single window that looked out at a brick wall. But it was hers, paid for with money she earned honestly, and that meant everything to someone who'd spent too many years with nowhere to call home. She showered quickly in water that never quite got hot enough, dressed in her cleaning uniform that she hand-washed every night, and caught the first bus at 5:30. The ride to the Harrington estate took an hour and 15 minutes, through neighborhoods that grew progressively wealthier until the houses disappeared behind gates and the streets became lined with trees instead of people. Elena didn't mind the commute. It gave her time to think, to prepare herself mentally for another day of being invisible. She'd learned the art of invisibility young, growing up in Mary's orphanage, where the quiet children got overlooked for adoption, but also avoided the worst of the neglect. Later, after aging out of the system at 18 with nothing but a garbage bag of clothes and $50, invisibility had kept her safe on the streets during the 2 months before she'd found her first real job. That was 15 years ago. 15 years of working her way up from nothing, taking whatever jobs she could find. Fast food restaurants where the manager screamed and customers treated you like furniture. Retail stores where you stood for 12 hours and came home with feet so swollen you couldn't walk. Office buildings where she cleaned toilets after midnight while everyone else was sleeping safely in their beds. The Harrington estate was actually one of the better jobs she'd had. The pay was decent, the other staff members were mostly kind, and the head of household, Mrs. Chen, had a strict policy about treating everyone with basic respect. The estate came into view as the bus rounded the final corner. Even after 6 months, Elena still felt a little flutter of something like awe when she saw it. 3 stories of pristine white stone, with columns that belonged in a history book, gardens that required a team of 5 full-time groundskeepers, a fountain in the front courtyard where water danced in patterns controlled by computer programs. It was beautiful in a way that felt almost unreal, like a movie set instead of a place where people actually lived. Elena got off at the service entrance as she always did. The staff had their own entrance, their own hallways, their own sections of the house they were permitted to access. She punched her time card at exactly 6:45 and grabbed her cleaning cart from the supply room. Today she was assigned to the East Wing, which included several guest bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, the library, and Mr. Harrington's private study. The study was always her last stop because it required the most care. Mr. Harrington was particular about his space, though not in an unreasonable way. He simply noticed things. A book moved from its designated spot. A pen left on the desk instead of returned to the holder. A window left open or closed when it should be the opposite. Elena had learned his preferences quickly and prided herself on never making the same mistake twice. She worked methodically through the East Wing, starting with the guest bedrooms that hadn't been used in weeks but still required dusting and vacuuming to maintain standards. The bathrooms came next, scrubbed until every surface sparkled. The library took nearly an hour, with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that collected dust in every carved detail and thousands of books that had to be dusted individually. It was nearly noon when Elena finally pushed her cart into Mr. Harrington's study. The room smelled of leather and old paper, with undertones of the expensive cologne he wore. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the back gardens, currently framing a view of perfectly manicured lawns and flowering trees. The desk was massive, made of dark wood with brass fixtures, covered in neat stacks of papers and folders. Several computer monitors sat dark and silent. Bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with business journals, classic literature, and what looked like photo albums. Elena started with the windows, cleaning them until they were invisible barriers between inside and out. Then she moved to dusting, working her way around the room with practiced efficiency. She was careful around the desk, moving papers only when absolutely necessary, and always returning them to their exact positions. Mr. Harrington had never been unkind to her, but he also barely seemed to notice she existed, which was fine, better than fine. Being noticed by powerful men rarely ended well for women in Elena's position. That's when she saw it, the portrait that hadn't been there yesterday. It hung on the wall between 2 bookcases, positioned at eye level in a simple but elegant frame. The photograph showed a young boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with warm brown eyes that seemed to look right through you. He had a shy smile, the kind that suggested he wasn't used to being the center of attention. Dark hair that was slightly too long, like nobody had bothered to take him for a haircut. He wore what looked like donated clothes, a sweater that was too big, and pants that had been hemmed inexpertly. Elena froze, her feather duster raised halfway to the frame. Something about that face tugged at her memory, insistent and impossible to ignore. She took a step closer, her heart beginning to pound for reasons she didn't understand yet. The boy's eyes. She knew those eyes, the shape of his face, the way his smile pulled slightly higher on the right side than the left. Memories started flooding back, unbidden and overwhelming. St. Mary's Orphanage, the cold dormitory where 30 children slept in bunk beds lined up like soldiers. The cafeteria where food was rationed and the older kids bullied the younger ones for extra portions. The courtyard where they were allowed outside for exactly 1 hour each day, weather permitting. And a little boy, a scared little boy who'd arrived when Elena was 13, so small and frightened that he wouldn't speak for the first 3 days. The other children had mocked him, called him names, stolen his food, but Elena had protected him, shared her own meager portions, let him sit with her during meals, read to him from the battered books in the orphanage library. His name had been Daniel. The feather duster fell from Elena's hand, hitting the hardwood floor with a soft thud that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet room. Her vision blurred as tears filled her eyes, 25 years of buried grief and loss suddenly demanding to be felt. She reached out with a trembling hand, not quite touching the glass over the photograph, and whispered, "It cannot be." But it was. She knew it with a certainty that went beyond logic. This was Daniel, the little boy who used to have nightmares about the parents who'd abandoned him at a hospital with nothing but a note pinned to his shirt. The boy who'd cried himself to sleep the first month he was at St. Mary's. The boy she'd protected and comforted and loved like a little brother because they were both alone, and alone together was better than alone by yourself. Elena stepped even closer, her whole body shaking now. "Sir," she whispered to the empty room, though she was barely conscious of speaking out loud. That boy lived with me in the orphanage." "What did you say?" The voice came from directly behind her, making Elena jump and spin around, her heart hammering against her ribs. Jonathan Harrington stood in the doorway of his study, briefcase in one hand and a look of shock on his face. She'd never been this close to him before, had never really looked at him as a person rather than just the distant billionaire who signed her paychecks. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair threaded with silver at the temples. He wore an expensive suit that fit perfectly, the kind that was custom-made rather than bought off a rack. But his eyes were warm brown, and they looked at Elena now with an intensity that made her want to run and stay in equal measure. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Harrington," Elena stammered, suddenly remembering her place. She was a cleaner, standing in her employer's private study, crying over a photograph she had no business being emotional about. "I didn't mean to. I was just dusting and I saw the portrait and—" "What did you say about the boy in the picture?" Jonathan interrupted, setting down his briefcase and taking a step closer. His voice wasn't angry, just urgent and slightly unsteady. "You said something about an orphanage?" Elena looked at the portrait, then back at Jonathan, then at the portrait again. And suddenly, impossibly, she saw it. The same warm brown eyes, the same slight asymmetry to his smile, the same face, just aged 25 years, and filled out with the confidence and success that came from a life very different from the one he'd started with. "This boy," Elena said, her voice breaking as she pointed at the portrait. "Daniel. He was like a brother to me. We grew up together at St. Mary's Orphanage. I was 13 when he arrived, and he was so small and scared. I took care of him, protected him from the older kids, shared my food, read him stories. We were family, the only family either of us had. Until—" her voice trailed off, the memory of that terrible day still sharp enough to cut even after all these years. "Until what?" Jonathan asked, and his voice was soft now, gentle in a way that made the tears spill faster down Elena's cheeks. "Until the day you were adopted," she whispered. "I was 16, you were 8. A nice couple came, said they wanted a son. They chose you, and I was so happy for you, Daniel. So happy because you deserved a family and love and everything I knew I would never get. You promised you'd come back for me. You held my hand and promised that once you were settled with your new family, you'd ask them to adopt me too. You promised we'd be real siblings, not just orphanage family." But Elena's legs felt weak, and she reached out to steady herself against the desk. "But you never came back. Days turned into weeks, turned into months. I waited. I hoped. I convinced myself that any day now, your new parents would arrive and take me home too. But they never did, and eventually I realized you'd forgotten about me, that you had a real family now and didn't need the scared orphan girl anymore." The silence that followed was so complete, Elena could hear her own heart beating. She couldn't look at Jonathan, couldn't bear to see pity or worse, confusion on his face because he didn't remember her at all. People forgot. Time passed and people forgot, especially people who'd gone on to build empires and live in mansions with portraits of their childhood hanging on study walls. "Elena," Jonathan said, and the way he said her name made her finally look up at him. His face was wet with tears, his expression a mixture of shock and something that looked almost like pain. "You're Elena? Elena Brooks?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "I never forgot you," he said, and his voice cracked on the words. "Not for a single day in the past 25 years. Elena, I didn't come back because I couldn't. My adoptive parents. They weren't nice people. They weren't the couple you met that day. Those were actors they'd hired to pass the orphanage's screening because they wanted a child for the wrong reasons. They wanted someone to work in their home, to do chores and earn money they could take. They didn't love me. They barely tolerated me." Elena's hand flew to her mouth as Jonathan continued, the words pouring out of him like they'd been held back too long. "I begged them to adopt you. I cried and pleaded and promised I'd work twice as hard if they'd just go back and get my sister. Because that's what you were to me, Elena. My sister, my protector. The only person who'd ever been kind to me without wanting something in return. But they said no. Said one kid was enough trouble. And when I kept asking, they forbade me from ever mentioning you again. Said if I brought it up one more time, they'd send me back to Street Mary's. He walked to the window, staring out at the gardens but clearly seeing something else entirely. I was terrified of going back to that place without you there, so I stayed quiet. I worked. I survived. And I promised myself that the moment I was old enough, strong enough, had enough resources, I would find you. I would fulfill the promise I made when I was 8 years old. Jonathan turned back to face Elena, and his eyes were intense with emotion. I became successful not just because I wanted to prove something or build an empire. I did it because I needed resources to search for you. I hired private investigators. I donated to orphanages and foster care organizations, hoping to rebuild connections. When I turned 18, I went back to Street Mary's to find you. But the building was closed, abandoned. I tracked down former staff members, but none of them remembered specific children. I searched for records, but they'd been destroyed in a fire years earlier. He laughed, but it was a bitter sound. I built this entire life, acquired all this wealth, and the one thing I actually wanted to find you seemed impossible. I had this portrait made from the only photo I have from my childhood. It was taken a week before I was adopted. I hung it yesterday because I was thinking about Street Mary's, about you, wondering if you were okay, if you'd found happiness, if you even remembered me. Elena couldn't hold back anymore. A sob escaped her throat, followed by another, and then she was crying in earnest. 25 years of grief and loss and loneliness pouring out all at once. She'd spent so many years convincing herself that she didn't matter, that she was forgettable, that Daniel had moved on and found a better life without her. But he'd remembered. He'd searched. He'd cared. Jonathan crossed the room quickly and, for a moment, seemed to hesitate. Then he did something that shocked Elena to her core. He pulled her into a hug, holding her gently like she was something precious that might break. She stiffened at first, unused to being touched kindly by anyone, let alone the billionaire who employed her. But then his arms tightened slightly, and he whispered, "I'm so sorry, Elena. I'm so sorry I couldn't keep my promise. I'm so sorry you spent all these years thinking I'd forgotten you." Elena's arms came up slowly, returning the embrace. He was so much taller than she remembered, no longer the scared little boy but a grown man. Yet somehow, in this moment, she could still feel echoes of the 8-year-old who used to hold her hand during scary movie nights at the orphanage. They stood like that for a long time, two people who'd been lost finally found, crying together in a study filled with books and success that suddenly felt less important than this moment of reunion. The employer and employee boundaries that should have existed had been obliterated by shared history and genuine emotion. When they finally pulled apart, both of them wiping at tears and probably looking ridiculous, Jonathan gestured to the leather armchairs by the window. "Please, sit. We have so much to talk about. I need to know everything. Where you've been, what you've done, how you ended up here of all places." Elena hesitated. "Mr. Harrington, I'm still on the clock. I have 3 more rooms to clean before my shift ends, and Mrs. Chen will—" "I don't care about the rooms," Jonathan interrupted gently. "And please, stop calling me Mr. Harrington. I'm Daniel, or Jonathan if that's easier, but not Mr. Harrington. Not between us, not after everything. I'll get in trouble," Elena said softly. "I need this job. I can't afford to lose it." Jonathan's expression shifted to something fierce. "You're not going to lose your job. In fact, consider yourself on paid leave for the rest of the day. I'll speak to Mrs. Chen personally. Elena, please, I've spent 25 years searching for you. Now that I've found you, I'm not letting you go before we've had a chance to actually talk." Slowly, carefully, Elena sank into one of the leather armchairs. It was more comfortable than her entire apartment, soft leather that seemed to embrace her. Jonathan sat in the chair across from her, and for a moment they just looked at each other, really looked, trying to reconcile memories with reality. "You grew up," Elena said with a watery laugh. "Last time I saw you, you barely came up to my shoulder. You stayed exactly the same," Jonathan said. "I mean, obviously older, but your eyes, your smile. I can't believe I didn't recognize you before this moment. I've seen you around the estate, you know." Noticed you were a particularly good worker, but I never really looked, never made the connection. How is that possible? How did we exist in the same space for 6 months without knowing? Because I'm a cleaner and you're a billionaire, Elena said simply. We live in the same building but different worlds. You're not supposed to notice me. That's part of my job, being unnoticed. Jonathan looked stricken by that. That changes now. Everything changes now. Does it? Elena asked, and she couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. Jonathan, you've built an incredible life. You're successful beyond anything either of us could have imagined back at St. Mary's, and I'm happy for you. I truly am. But I'm still just a cleaner. We're not kids in an orphanage anymore. We're not equals. We are equals, Jonathan said firmly. We're family. That's what you told me when I was 8 and terrified. You said we were family, and family takes care of each other. That hasn't changed, Elena. It will never change. Elena wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that their childhood bond could survive the vast difference in their current circumstances. But she'd learned hard lessons about the way the world worked, about how power and money created barriers that were nearly impossible to cross. Tell me what happened to you after I was adopted, Jonathan said, leaning forward in his chair. I need to know. All these years, I've imagined so many different scenarios. Did someone else adopt you? Did you find a good family? Elena shook her head slowly. No one wanted a 16-year-old girl. People who adopt want babies or young children. Teenagers are too much trouble, too set in their ways, too likely to have problems. I stayed at St. Mary's until I aged out at 18. Then I was on my own. She told him about those early years, and it was harder than she expected. Talking about sleeping in her car because she couldn't afford both rent and food, taking 3 jobs at once just to survive, the time she'd gone to sleep hungry, the constant fear that something would go wrong and she'd end up on the streets permanently. The predatory landlords and employers who saw vulnerable young women as easy targets. Jonathan listened without interrupting, but his hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. When Elena finally finished with a sanitized version of her history that left out the worst parts, he looked like he might be sick. I should have found you sooner, he said roughly. I should have tried harder. I had resources, connections. I should have. You were a child, Elena interrupted gently. And then you were a teenager trapped in a bad situation yourself. You can't blame yourself for not having power you didn't possess. We both survived, Jonathan. That's what matters. We made it through, and now, somehow, we've found each other again. Tell me about now, Jonathan said. How did you end up working here? Do you have family, a partner, children? Elena shook her head. No family, no partner, just me. I've been working as a cleaner for the past 15 years, moving between different companies and estates. The agency I work for sent me here 6 months ago. The pay was better than my previous assignment, so I took it. I had no idea you owned this estate. Had no idea Daniel from St. Mary's had become Jonathan Harrington. I don't follow business news or society pages. I just work and try to save enough money to maybe someday have something more than a studio apartment and second-hand furniture. The sadness in Jonathan's eyes was almost unbearable. Elena, I have so much, more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Multiple properties, investments, businesses, and you've been struggling, working yourself to exhaustion. If I had known, if I had any idea you were here, you would have what? Elena asked. Given me money? Offered me charity? Jonathan, I appreciate the sentiment, but I've made it this far on my own. I don't need rescuing. It's not charity, Jonathan said firmly. It's family, and family helps each other. You helped me when I had nothing to offer in return. Let me help you now. Elena wanted to refuse on principle. Pride was one of the few things she had left. But looking at Jonathan's earnest face, seeing the little boy she'd once protected visible in the man he'd become, she felt that pride soften. What do you suggest? She asked carefully. Jonathan thought for a moment. First, you're not working as a cleaner anymore. Not because there's anything wrong with the job, but because you're capable of so much more and have never been given the opportunity to show it. I need someone I can trust absolutely to help manage my personal affairs. Someone organized, discreet, hardworking. Someone who knows me. really knows me, not just the public persona. Would you consider being my personal assistant? Elena blinked. Jonathan, I don't have any office experience. I barely graduated high school because I was working full-time to support myself. I can clean and do manual labor, but administrative work requires skills I don't have. Skills can be learned, Jonathan said. Character can't. You're loyal, Elena. You're kind but not naive. You're survived things that would have broken most people. Those qualities matter more than any degree or training. We'll get you whatever education you need. Computer classes, professional development, whatever it takes. But the core of who you are, that's what I need. Elena felt overwhelmed. 6 hours ago, she'd been a cleaner whose biggest concern was making sure the study was dusted properly. Now she was sitting in a leather armchair being offered a life-changing opportunity by the little boy she'd once protected who'd grown into a billionaire. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course, Jonathan said immediately. Take all the time you need. But Elena, there's something else. Your living situation. You said you have a studio apartment. Is it safe? Comfortable? Elena thought about her cramped space with the unreliable heating and the neighbors who fought loudly at 3 in the morning. It's fine. That's not an answer, Jonathan said gently. Is it safe and comfortable? It's what I can afford, Elena said, which was the truth. Jonathan stood and walked to his desk, pulling out a notepad and pen. He wrote something, tore off the page, and handed it to Elena. It was an address in one of the nicest parts of the city. That's a property I own, he explained. A small house, 2 bedrooms, fully furnished. It's been empty for a year because I couldn't decide whether to sell it or rent it out. Consider it yours. Move in whenever you're ready. Jonathan, I can't accept. You can, and you will, he said firmly. Elena, you gave me hope when I had none. You shared food when you were hungry yourself. You protected me when you were just a kid yourself who needed protection. Let me return the favor, please. Not because you need charity, but because you're my family, and family takes care of each other. Elena looked at the address, then at Jonathan's earnest face, then back at the address. A house, a real house with 2 bedrooms and furniture. The idea was so far beyond her reality that she couldn't quite process it. Okay, she whispered. Okay, thank you. Jonathan's face broke into the first genuine smile Elena had seen from him, and suddenly she could see 8-year-old Daniel superimposed over the billionaire features. That same joy, that same relief, that same hope. They spent the next 3 hours talking. Jonathan wanted to know everything about Elena's life, and she found herself opening up in ways she never had before. She told him about the good times and the bad, the small victories and the crushing defeats. He listened like every word mattered, like her life story was more important than any business deal or board meeting. And Jonathan shared his own story. The adoptive parents who'd used him as unpaid labor. The moment he'd realized he had a talent for business and used it to escape. His first successful venture at 19 that had given him enough money to move out. The years of building his empire, driven partly by ambition but mostly by the need to have enough resources to find the sister he'd lost. If you've ever lost someone important and wished you could find them again, share your story in the comments. Because sometimes, fate has plans we can't imagine. By the time Mrs. Chen knocked on the study door to ask if everything was all right, it was past 3 in the afternoon, and Elena's shift should have ended hours ago. Jonathan invited the head of household in and explained, without going into too much detail, that Elena was an old friend and would no longer be working as a cleaner. Mrs. Chen took it in stride, congratulating Elena with genuine warmth before leaving to adjust the staffing schedule. Elena felt guilty about leaving her co-workers short-handed, but Jonathan assured her he'd hire additional staff to cover the gap. When Elena finally left the estate that evening, it was with Jonathan's promise to have dinner with her that weekend, a set of keys to her new house, and a heart so full it felt like it might burst. She took the bus home to her studio apartment, seeing it with new eyes. This was the last time she'd wake up here. This was the last time she'd feel unsafe or uncomfortable or alone. 25 years ago, a scared 8-year-old boy had promised he'd come back for her, and though it had taken much longer than either of them could have imagined, Though the path had been twisted and painful and full of years where hope seemed impossible, that promise had finally been kept. Daniel had come back for her, and this time, neither of them would ever be lost again. The weekend came faster than Elena expected. After years of weekends meaning nothing more than a different set of cleaning assignments or extra shifts at various jobs, having Saturday and Sunday completely free felt strange and almost wrong. But Jonathan had been insistent when he'd called her Thursday evening. Take the weekend off, rest, move into the new house, and on Sunday evening, he'd like to take her to dinner if she was willing. Elena had spent Friday moving her meager belongings from the studio apartment to the house Jonathan had given her. It was located in Riverside Heights, a neighborhood Elena had only ever passed through on buses, never imagining she'd actually live there. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained sidewalks, children playing in yards while parents watched from porches, the kind of place where people felt safe leaving their doors unlocked. The house itself was more than Elena had dared to dream. 2 bedrooms, though calling them bedrooms felt insufficient. The master had a walk-in closet, larger than her previous bathroom, and windows that let in streams of golden sunlight. The second bedroom was set up as an office, complete with a desk, bookshelf, and computer she had no idea how to use, but was determined to learn. The kitchen had modern appliances, granite countertops, and enough cabinet space for someone who actually cooked real meals instead of heating up ramen noodles. The living room had comfortable furniture arranged around a fireplace that actually worked. There was a small backyard with a garden that had been neglected, but showed signs of once being beautiful. Elena had walked through the house crying happy tears, touching everything gently like it might disappear if she wasn't careful. This was hers. All of this was hers, given freely by someone who remembered her, who'd searched for her, who considered her family. She spent Saturday cleaning, which felt strange considering the house was already clean, but it helped her feel like she was earning her place somehow. She organized her few clothes in the massive closet, arranged her handful of books on the office shelves, and tried to make the space feel lived in rather than borrowed. Sunday morning, Elena woke up in a real bed for the first time in months. Her previous mattress had been on the floor, a second-hand thing with springs that poked through the padding. This bed was soft but supportive, with pillows that cradled her head perfectly and sheets that felt like luxury against her skin. She lay there for a while, watching sunlight paint patterns on the ceiling, thinking about how dramatically her life had changed in less than a week. By evening, Elena was nervous about dinner in a way she hadn't been nervous about anything in years. Jonathan had said casual, but what did casual mean to a billionaire? She'd gone shopping yesterday, using money from her last paycheck to buy a simple blue dress that was nicer than anything she'd owned in years, but still modest enough to feel like her. She paired it with the only shoes she had that weren't sneakers or work boots, and spent longer than necessary trying to do something with her hair that looked intentional rather than accidental. Jonathan picked her up at 6, driving himself in a car that was nice but not ostentatious. When Elena answered the door, his eyes widened slightly and he smiled. "You look beautiful." "You look pretty good yourself," Elena said. And it was true. He wore dark jeans and a navy button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, managing to look both casual and put together in that effortless way some people had. They drove to a restaurant on the edge of the city, a place Jonathan said he liked because it was good food without the pretension of fancier establishments. The interior was warm and welcoming, with exposed brick walls and soft lighting. They were seated at a corner table that offered privacy without feeling isolated. "How was your first night in the new house?" Jonathan asked once they'd ordered. "Surreal," Elena admitted. "I kept waking up thinking I'd dreamed the whole thing. The house, finding you, all of it. But then I'd open my eyes and see the ceiling instead of water stains and remember it was real. I'm glad you're settling in. And Elena, I meant what I said about the job offer. I've already started the process of hiring a trainer to help you learn the systems and software. No pressure, but the position is yours if you want it." Elena took a sip of water, gathering her thoughts. "I want it. I'm terrified I'll be terrible at it, but I want to try. You're giving me a chance I never thought I'd have, Jonathan. A chance to be something more than I've been." "You were already something more," Jonathan said firmly. "You just never had the opportunity to show it." "Elena, I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about being invisible, about cleaning being a job where you're not supposed to be noticed. That's been my life too, in a different way. Billionaire CEO, successful businessman, but nobody really sees me. They see the money, the power, the opportunity I represent, but they don't see the kid from street, Mary's who still has nightmares about being sent back. They don't see the person I actually am beneath all the trappings of success. I see you, Elena said softly. I've always seen you, Daniel. Even when you were tiny and scared and new to the orphanage, I saw someone special, someone kind and thoughtful who deserved better than what life had given him. That hasn't changed. Jonathan reached across the table and took her hand, the gesture feeling natural despite the years they'd been apart. That's why finding you again feels like coming home. You're the only person in my life who knew me before everything, before the adoptive parents, before the business success, before the wealth. You knew me when I was nothing, and you cared anyway. You were never nothing, Elena said, squeezing his hand. You were a scared little boy who needed kindness. That's not nothing, that's everything. Their food arrived, and they ate while talking about lighter topics. Jonathan shared funny stories about difficult board meetings and eccentric business partners. Elena told him about some of the more ridiculous cleaning jobs she'd had over the years, including one mansion where the owner had 17 cats and refused to let anyone vacuum because it disturbed them. It felt easy, talking with Jonathan, like slipping into a conversation they'd been having for years rather than trying to rebuild a connection from scratch. The 8-year-old boy and 13-year-old girl who'd found family in each other at Street Mary's were still there, visible beneath the adults they'd become. Can I ask you something personal? Jonathan said over dessert, a chocolate cake they were sharing. After the week we've had, I think we're past the point of avoiding personal questions, Elena said with a small smile. Why didn't you ever try to find me? I know I was supposed to come back for you, but once you aged out, once you had freedom to go where you wanted, did you ever think about looking for me? Elena was quiet for a moment, considering how to answer honestly without sounding accusatory. I did think about it, she finally said, especially in the early years. But Jonathan, I didn't know your adoptive parents' names. I barely knew your last name changed when you were adopted. I had no resources, no computer skills, no idea where to even begin looking, and as time passed, I convinced myself that you'd probably forgotten about me, that you had a new family and a new life, and searching for you would be intrusive. She took a breath. There was also fear. Fear that I'd find you and you wouldn't remember me, or worse, that you would remember, but had moved on and didn't want the reminder of where you came from. It seemed safer to keep you as a good memory rather than risk tarnishing it with reality. I never forgot, Jonathan said, his voice thick with emotion. Not for one day. Elena, you were the only good thing about my childhood, the only person who made me feel like I mattered. I carried that with me through everything. I know that now, Elena said gently, and I'm sorry I didn't have more faith. But Daniel, Jonathan, you have to understand, I'd been disappointed so many times, by parents who abandoned me at the orphanage, by couples who looked at me and chose other children, by the system that turned me out at 18 with nothing. I learned not to hope too hard, because hope hurt when it died. Jonathan nodded slowly. I understand that. My adoptive parents taught me the same lesson, just in a different way. They showed me that adults could promise anything and deliver nothing. That family was just a word people used when they wanted something from you. But we're neither of us those scared kids anymore, Elena said. We survived. We made it through to the other side, and somehow, impossibly, we found each other again. Fate, Jonathan said with a small smile. Or luck, or the universe finally deciding to give us a break. Whatever you want to call it, I'm grateful. After dinner, Jonathan drove Elena home, but neither of them seemed ready for the evening to end. They sat in his car in her driveway, talking about memories from Street Mary's, the good ones and the bad ones, the night terrors and the moments of laughter, the found family they'd created with other kids who were equally lost. Do you ever wonder what happened to the others? Elena asked. Carlos, who always told jokes, little Amy, who sucked her thumb until she was 10, Marcus, who drew pictures on everything. All the time, Jonathan admitted. I tried to find some of them over the years, but it's hard when you only have first names and vague memories. The orphanage burning down destroyed any paper trail that might have existed. Street Mary's burned? Elena asked, shocked. When? About 12 years ago. Some kind of electrical fire. The building was condemned and eventually demolished. That's why I couldn't find any records when I went looking. Elena felt a strange pang of loss for a place she'd hated. I always imagined it would still be there, that maybe someday I'd go back as a successful adult and show them I'd made it. Stupid, probably. Not stupid, Jonathan said. Human. We all want to prove something to the people and places that underestimated us. They were quiet for a moment, lost in their own thoughts. Then Jonathan turned to face her more fully. Elena, I want to be completely honest with you about something. When I gave you the house and offered you the job, it wasn't just because you're my old friend from the orphanage. It was because, over the past week, talking with you, reconnecting with you, I've realized something. You're not just part of my past. You're someone I want in my future. Elena's breath caught. Jonathan, what are you saying? I'm saying that finding you again has made me happier than I've been in years, maybe ever. I'm saying that when I think about my life going forward, you're in it. Not as an employee or an old friend I help out of guilt, as someone who matters to me deeply. He paused, seeming nervous in a way she'd never seen him. I'm not saying I'm in love with you. That would be too fast, too much pressure. But I am saying that I could be, that I want the chance to see where this goes. If you're interested, if I'm not completely misreading everything. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were happy tears. You're not misreading anything. Jonathan, I've spent the past week trying to sort out my feelings, trying to separate gratitude from genuine affection, trying to be realistic about the differences in our circumstances. But the truth is, when I'm with you, I feel safe in a way I've never felt before. I feel seen and valued and cared for. And those feelings don't have anything to do with the house or the job. They're about you, about who you are, and how you make me feel. So we're doing this? Jonathan asked, a smile spreading across his face, taking a chance on something that could be amazing or could be complicated. We're doing this, Elena confirmed, slowly, carefully, with lots of communication and honesty. But yes, we're doing this. Jonathan leaned across the console and cupped Elena's face gently, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wanted. But she didn't want to. She leaned into his touch, and when his lips met hers, it felt like coming home and going on an adventure all at once. The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling like teenagers instead of adults in their 30s. I should let you go inside, Jonathan said reluctantly. It's late, and you probably want to rest. I don't want to rest, Elena admitted. I want to stay up all night talking with you. But you're probably right. We should take this slow. Slow is good, Jonathan agreed. Slow is smart. Besides, we have all the time in the world now. Elena got out of the car, but before closing the door, she leaned back in. Jonathan, thank you for everything, for remembering me, for searching for me, for giving me a chance at something better. But mostly, thank you for being you, the boy who held my hand during scary movies, and the man who treats me like I matter. Both versions are pretty wonderful. Get some sleep, Elena, Jonathan said, his voice warm with affection. I'll call you tomorrow. Elena walked to her front door, unlocked it with keys that still felt surreal in her hand, and turned to wave as Jonathan pulled away. She stood in her doorway, in her house, in the neighborhood she'd never imagined living in, feeling happier and more hopeful than she'd felt in 25 years. Inside, Elena got ready for bed in a bathroom with water pressure that actually worked and towels that were soft instead of threadbare. She changed into pajamas that were new, bought with money she'd earned at the estate before everything changed, and she climbed into her comfortable bed with its soft sheets and supportive mattress, thinking about how much her life had transformed in 1 week. If you've ever had your life change suddenly for the better, if you've ever been given a second chance you thought was impossible, share your story in the comments below. Because sometimes miracles happen when we least expect them. The next several weeks were a whirlwind of change and growth. Elena started her new position as Jonathan's personal assistant, working with a trainer named Patricia, who was patient and encouraging, as Elena learned systems that seemed impossibly complex at first. There were moments of frustration, times when Elena was convinced she'd never understand the software or remember all the protocols. But slowly, with practice and Patricia's guidance, it started to click. She learned how to manage Jonathan's complex schedule, balancing business meetings with social obligations and personal time. She learned how to handle correspondence, filtering the important from the mundane. She learned about the various businesses and charitable foundations Jonathan was involved with, familiarizing herself with the key players and ongoing projects. Jonathan was an excellent boss, patient when she made mistakes, and generous with praise when she succeeded. But he was also becoming something more. They had dinner together twice a week, sometimes at restaurants and sometimes at Elena's new house where they'd cook together and talk for hours. They texted throughout the day, sharing funny observations or asking quick questions. They fell into an easy rhythm that felt both new and ancient at the same time. Elena also started attending therapy. Jonathan had gently suggested it one evening, mentioning that he'd been in therapy for years, processing his own childhood trauma. Elena had been resistant at first, seeing it as another form of charity, but Jonathan explained that therapy wasn't about being broken, it was about healing, and healing was something everyone deserved, regardless of their circumstances. Her therapist, Dr. Reeves, was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the ability to ask questions that made Elena think deeply about things she'd been avoiding. They talked about her childhood, her time at Street Mary's, the years of survival that followed. They talked about her learned habit of making herself invisible and small. They talked about learning to take up space, to believe she deserved good things, to accept help without feeling guilty. It was hard work, harder than any physical labor Elena had ever done, but it was also freeing. With each session, she felt a little lighter, a little more at peace with her past and present. 2 months after the reunion, Jonathan invited Elena to a charity gala. "It's for one of my foundations," he explained. "We support programs for foster kids and orphans. It would mean a lot to me if you'd come as my date. Not just as my assistant, but as someone I care about. But I know it's a big event with lots of people and press, so no pressure if you're not comfortable." Elena's first instinct was to say no. The idea of attending a gala with billionaires and socialites terrified her. But then she thought about what Dr. Reeves had been saying about taking up space and believing she belonged. "I'll need a dress," she said, "and maybe some coaching on how to behave at fancy events. But yes, I'd love to go." Jonathan's face lit up. "We'll go shopping together. And Elena, you don't need coaching on how to behave. Just be yourself. That's all I want." Shopping for the gala was an experience Elena would never forget. Jonathan took her to boutiques where staff members knew him by name and brought out dresses that cost more than Elena used to make in a year. At first, she felt overwhelmed and out of place, but Jonathan was patient, encouraging her to try things on, giving honest feedback about what looked good and what didn't. They finally found the perfect dress. It was emerald green, simple but elegant, with a cut that flattered without being too revealing. Elena barely recognized herself in the mirror, standing taller and straighter than usual, looking like someone who belonged in a dress like this. "You're stunning," Jonathan said softly, standing behind her in the mirror. "Absolutely stunning." Elena blushed, still not used to compliments. "It's just the dress." "It's you," Jonathan corrected. "The dress is nice, but it's you that makes it special." The night of the gala, Jonathan picked Elena up wearing a tuxedo that made her mouth go dry. He looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine, all polished elegance and confident grace. When he saw Elena in her dress, his eyes widened, and for a moment he just stared. "You're going to be the most beautiful woman there," he finally said. "Doubtful," Elena said, but she smiled. "Have you seen the guest list? I'm pretty sure there will be actual models and actresses there. And none of them will hold a candle to you," Jonathan said firmly. "Beauty isn't just about physical appearance, Elena. It's about kindness and strength and everything you are inside. That kind of beauty outshines everything else." The gala was held at a luxury hotel downtown. As they pulled up in Jonathan's car, Elena saw photographers and crowds and felt her anxiety spike. But Jonathan took her hand, squeezed it gently, and said, Just stay with me. I've got you." They walked in together, Jonathan's hand on the small of Elena's back, and she tried not to think about the cameras flashing or the way people stared. Inside, the ballroom was transformed into something from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers, elegant flower arrangements, tables set with fine china and stemware that probably cost more per glass than Elena's entire previous wardrobe. Jonathan introduced Elena to people, and she tried to remember names and faces and not feel intimidated by the wealth and power surrounding her. Some people were warm and welcoming. Others looked at her with thinly veiled curiosity or judgment, clearly wondering who this unknown woman was and why she was with Jonathan Harrington. One woman in particular, a socialite named Vanessa, made her displeasure clear. "Jonathan, darling, I don't believe we've met your friend," she said, eyeing Elena with barely concealed disdain. "This is Elena Brooks," Jonathan said warmly, "my personal assistant and someone very important to me." "How lovely," Vanessa said in a tone that suggested it wasn't lovely at all. "And how did you two meet?" "We grew up together," Elena said simply, not offering more details. "How charming," Vanessa said, though her expression suggested she found it anything but. She turned her attention back to Jonathan. "Will we see you at the Thompsons next weekend?" "Everyone who matters will be there." "I haven't decided yet," Jonathan said, his tone cooling slightly. "If you'll excuse us, I promised Elena a drink." He guided Elena away, and she released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That woman hates me. That woman is bitter and unhappy and takes it out on anyone she perceives as a threat," Jonathan said. "Don't let her get to you." "Why would I be a threat to her?" Jonathan smiled. "Because she's been trying to date me for 3 years, and I've never been interested. Now I show up with a beautiful woman who actually matters to me, and her ego is bruised." "Oh," Elena said, feeling strangely pleased by that information. The evening progressed, and Elena found herself relaxing slightly. Not everyone was like Vanessa. Many people were genuinely kind, interested in her perspective, and supportive of the Foundation's work. During the speeches, Jonathan talked about his own experience in the foster system, and Elena felt tears prick at her eyes as he shared parts of his story she'd never heard him speak about publicly. "I was lucky," he said to the crowd. "I survived, and I found success. But many kids don't. They age out of the system with nothing and nowhere to go. They struggle with mental health issues, addiction, homelessness. They deserve better. This foundation exists to give them better, to provide the resources and support that can mean the difference between surviving and thriving." The crowd applauded, and Elena felt pride swell in her chest. This man, this successful billionaire, was using his resources to help kids like they'd been. He hadn't forgotten where he came from. He was making a difference. Later in the evening, during the dancing portion, Jonathan led Elena onto the floor for a slow song. She was nervous, having never really learned to dance properly, but he guided her gently, making it feel easy. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said as they swayed together. "Having you here meant more than you probably realize." "Thank you for inviting me," Elena said, "and for believing I could handle it. A few months ago, the idea of attending something like this would have been unthinkable." "You handled it beautifully," Jonathan said. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Elena. You always have been." They danced together as the music played, surrounded by wealthy people in a ballroom that cost more to rent for one night than most people earned in a year. But in that moment, Elena didn't feel out of place. She felt like she belonged, like she had every right to be here, in this dress, with this man, living this life. Because she did belong. Not because of charity or luck, but because she'd survived 25 years of hardship and come out the other side still kind, still hopeful, still herself. That was worth celebrating. That was worth taking up space for. As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave, Elena realized something profound. She wasn't the invisible cleaner anymore, moving through rooms like a ghost. She wasn't the scared orphan waiting for someone to choose her. She wasn't even just Jonathan's assistant or his childhood friend. She was Elena Brooks, someone with her own strength, her own story, her own worth, and she was exactly where she was supposed to be. On the drive home, Jonathan reached over and took her hand. "Move in with me," he said suddenly. Elena looked at him in surprise. "What? I know it's fast. I know we're supposed to be taking things slow. But Elena, I hate dropping you off at your house and driving home alone. I hate going to bed without you. I hate the time we spend apart. I know conventional wisdom says we should wait longer, but I also know that I'm sure about you, about us. Move in with me. Not because I'm your employer or because I feel obligated, but because I love you and I want you in my life completely." Elena felt her heart skip a beat. "You love me." "I love you," Jonathan confirmed, pulling the car over so he could look at her properly. "I've probably loved you since we were kids, and you shared your food with me even though you were hungry too. I definitely love you now. The way you laugh, the way you see the best in people, the way you're brave even when you're scared. I love all of it. I love you." Tears streamed down Elena's face, but they were happy tears, the happiest tears she'd ever cried. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I've loved you for a while, but was too afraid to admit it, afraid it was too good to be true, afraid I'd mess it up somehow." "You won't mess it up," Jonathan said, cupping her face gently. "We'll figure it out together. So what do you say? Will you move in with me?" Elena thought about the house she'd only lived in for 2 months, the first real home she'd ever had. It had been a gift, a sanctuary, a place where she'd learned to feel safe. But it wasn't where her heart was. Her heart was with Jonathan, the boy who'd become a man but never stopped being her family. "Yes," she said, smiling through her tears. "Yes, I'll move in with you." Jonathan kissed her then, and it felt like sealing a promise. The promise he'd made 25 years ago had finally been kept. He'd come back for her. Maybe not in the way either of them had imagined, maybe not in the timeline they'd hoped for. But he'd come back, he'd found her, and he'd chosen her, not once but twice. Some promises took longer to keep than others. Some journeys took decades instead of days, but that didn't make them any less meaningful. In fact, it made them more so, because 25 years later, 2 orphans who'd found family in each other had found each other again, and this time, nothing would separate them. Elena moved into the Harrington estate 3 weeks later, not as a cleaner this time, not as staff slipping through service entrances and keeping to designated hallways. She moved in as Jonathan's partner, through the front door, into the master suite that was now theirs together. It felt surreal in the best possible way. The staff had been informed of the change in her status, and their reactions varied. Most were genuinely happy for both of them, especially Sophie from her cleaning days, who cried happy tears and hugged Elena tightly. Mrs. Chen offered her congratulations with dignified warmth. A few seemed uncertain how to navigate the shift from colleague to their employer's significant other, but they were respectful and kind. Elena insisted on keeping her job as Jonathan's personal assistant. She loved the work, loved the challenge of it, loved feeling useful and capable. Jonathan agreed, though he made it clear that if it ever became too complicated to separate personal and professional, they'd figure something else out. "I don't want you to feel like you have to work," he'd said. "You never have to earn your place here, Elena. This is your home because I love you, not because you're my assistant." "I know that," Elena had assured him, "but I want to work. I need to feel like I'm contributing, like I'm building something of my own. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Jonathan had said, kissing her forehead. "I just wanted you to know you have options." Living together was an adjustment for both of them. Jonathan had lived alone for years, used to having everything exactly as he wanted it. Elena was used to surviving in small spaces, being quiet and unobtrusive. They had to learn each other's rhythms and habits, how to share space without getting in each other's way, when to give each other room, and when to come together. But it was a good adjustment. Elena loved waking up next to Jonathan, loved the way he made coffee for both of them each morning, loved the quiet evenings they spent reading in the library or talking on the terrace overlooking the gardens. She loved the way he'd absent-mindedly reach for her hand when they were sitting together, loved the way he looked at her like she was the most important thing in his world. 4 months after Elena moved in, Jonathan came home from a business trip with an envelope. "I have something for you," he said, his expression both excited and nervous. "It took some doing, but I finally tracked them down." "Tracked who down?" Elena asked, taking the envelope. Some of the kids from Street Mary's, the ones we remembered. Carlos, Amy, Marcus. I hired a team of investigators, and they found them. Elena's hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside were printouts with photos and basic information. Carlos Martinez, living in Denver, working as a mechanic, married with 2 kids. Amy Chen, living in Portland, a social worker specializing in foster care. Marcus Thompson, living in Chicago, an art teacher at an inner-city school. Tears streamed down Elena's face as she looked at the pictures. These kids who'd been lost and scared, just like her and Jonathan, they'd survived. They'd built lives. They were okay. I thought maybe we could reach out to them, Jonathan said. If you want to, no pressure. I just thought you might like to know they made it too. Elena threw her arms around Jonathan's neck, crying happy tears against his shoulder. Thank you. Thank you for doing this, for finding them, for caring about the people who mattered to us back then. They reached out to each person carefully, through letters that explained who they were and what they wanted, just to reconnect, to know they were okay, to maybe rebuild connections that had been lost to time and circumstance. Carlos responded first, with an enthusiastic email that included dozens of photos of his family and an invitation to visit anytime. Amy was more cautious but warm, suggesting a video call to reconnect. Marcus sent a letter with drawings he'd made, including one from memory of the 4 of them sitting in the Street Mary's courtyard, and an invitation to his next art show. Over the following months, Elena and Jonathan reconnected with all 3. They flew to Denver and spent a weekend with Carlos and his family, swapping stories about Street Mary's and marveling at how their lives had turned out. They video chatted with Amy regularly, and she gave them insights into the current foster care system that helped inform the work of Jonathan's foundation. They attended Marcus's art show in Chicago and bought 3 of his paintings, which now hung in the estate. It was healing in a way Elena hadn't expected. These people who'd shared her darkest years, who understood the unique trauma of growing up unwanted and alone, they'd all survived. They'd all found ways to build meaningful lives, and now, decades later, they could support each other as adults in ways they couldn't as children. 6 months after moving in together, Jonathan proposed. Not at a fancy restaurant or some elaborate public display, but on a quiet Tuesday evening in their home library. They were reading together, Elena curled up in her favorite chair with a novel, while Jonathan reviewed business documents on the couch. The fire crackled in the fireplace, rain pattered against the windows, and everything felt perfectly peaceful. "Marry me," Jonathan said suddenly, looking up from his papers. Elena lowered her book, wondering if she'd heard correctly. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, setting aside his documents and coming to kneel beside her chair. "I don't have a ring yet. I was planning this whole elaborate proposal, but Elena, I don't want to wait. I don't need grand gestures or perfect moments. I just need you. For the rest of my life, I need you. So marry me, please." Elena felt tears well up, but she was smiling so wide her cheeks hurt. "You're serious? Right now? In your sweatpants with no ring? You're proposing? Is that a problem?" Jonathan asked, looking slightly worried. "No." Elena laughed, pulling him up into the chair with her. "No, it's perfect. It's so perfectly us. And yes, Daniel Jonathan Harrington, I will absolutely marry you." They kissed, and it felt like sealing not just a promise, but a destiny that had been written 25 years ago, when a scared little boy and a protective teenage girl had found family in each other at an orphanage where nobody else wanted them. They were married 3 months later in a ceremony held on the estate grounds. It was small and intimate, just the people who mattered most. Carlos flew in from Denver with his family. Amy came from Portland, Marcus from Chicago. Jonathan's business partner and closest friend, David, stood as best man. Sophie was Elena's maid of honor, crying through the entire ceremony. Elena wore a simple ivory dress that made her feel beautiful without being overwhelming. Jonathan wore a dark suit and cried when he saw her walking down the makeshift aisle in their garden. The officiant, a judge who was also one of Jonathan's longtime friends, spoke about the power of promises kept and second chances, and love that survives impossible odds. When they exchanged vows, Elena felt like her heart might burst. "I promise to choose you every day," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I promise to be your family, your home, your safe place to land. I promise to remember where we came from while building where we're going. I promise to love you, Daniel, the scared little boy, and Jonathan, the incredible man you've become, for all the days of my life." Jonathan's vows were equally emotional. "I promise to keep the promise I made when I was 8 years old, to come back for you, to protect you, to make sure you're never alone again. I promise to see you, really see you, every single day, to celebrate your strength and support you through weakness, to build a life with you that honors both our past and our future. I promise to love you, Elena, with everything I am, for as long as I live." When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, the small crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Jonathan pulled Elena into his arms and kissed her like they were the only two people in the world. And in that moment, surrounded by people who loved them, standing in the gardens of the estate where their lives had collided again, Elena felt complete in a way she'd never felt before. The reception was held in a tent on the estate grounds, with dinner, dancing, and speeches that made everyone laugh and cry in equal measure. Carlos told stories about young Daniel at street, Mary's that had everyone in stitches. Sophie talked about cleaning the estate with Elena and never imagining her friend would end up marrying the owner. David spoke about watching Jonathan search for years for someone from his past and how happy he was that the search had ended in love. Elena danced with her husband, and the words, "her husband," felt impossibly wonderful in her mind. This man who'd once been a scared little boy holding her hand during thunderstorms was now her partner, her family, her home. They'd traveled impossible distances, survived unthinkable hardships, and somehow found their way back to each other. If you've ever believed in fate, in the idea that some people are meant to find each other no matter what obstacles stand in their way, share your story in the comments. Because Elena and Jonathan's journey proves that some connections are too strong for time or distance or circumstance to break. After the wedding, life settled into a new normal that Elena treasured. She and Jonathan worked together during the day, comfortable enough with each other to be both professional colleagues and loving partners. They traveled together, both for business and pleasure, Elena finally seeing all the places she'd only dreamed about. But the most fulfilling work came from Jonathan's foundation for foster children and orphans. Elena became deeply involved, using her own experience to shape programs and policies. She started a mentorship program pairing adults who'd aged out of the foster system with kids currently in it, giving them connections and support they desperately needed. She also began speaking publicly about her experiences. At first, it terrified her, standing in front of audiences, sharing the most painful parts of her past, making herself vulnerable to judgment and pity. But Jonathan stood beside her, literally and figuratively, and she found her voice grew stronger with each speech. "I was invisible for most of my life," she said at one particularly large conference. "As a kid in an orphanage that nobody wanted, as a minimum wage worker that nobody saw. I learned to take up as little space as possible, to ask for nothing, to expect nothing. But invisibility isn't protection, it's another form of prison. Everyone deserves to be seen. Every child deserves to be valued. That's what we're fighting for with this foundation. Not just basic needs like food and shelter, though those matter, but the deeper need to be seen, to be known, to matter to someone." The audience gave her a standing ovation, and Elena saw several people crying. After the speech, multiple people approached her, wanting to share their own stories or asking how they could get involved. Elena realized that by making herself visible, by refusing to hide her past or pretend it didn't matter, she was helping others feel less alone. 1 year after their wedding, Elena discovered she was pregnant. She and Jonathan had talked about having children, both agreeing they wanted to build the family neither of them had growing up. But when the test showed positive, Elena felt equal parts thrilled and terrified. "What if I'm a terrible mother?" she asked Jonathan that evening, her voice shaking. "What if I don't know how to do this? I never had an example to follow. What if I mess up our child, the way my parents messed me up by abandoning me?" Jonathan pulled her close, holding her tight. "You're going to be an amazing mother. You already know the most important thing. how to love unconditionally, how to protect, how to see someone and make them feel valued. That's what you did for me when we were kids, and that's what you'll do for our child. But what if it's not enough? Elena whispered. Then we'll figure it out together, Jonathan said firmly. We'll get parenting books, take classes, go to therapy if we need to. And Elena, we'll love this child with everything we have. That's more than either of us got. And it's more than enough. The pregnancy was smooth, and 8 months later, Elena gave birth to a healthy baby girl they named Grace. Grace Elizabeth Harrington, born weighing 7 pounds 4 ounces, with Jonathan's warm brown eyes and Elena's gentle smile. Holding her daughter for the first time, Elena wept, not from pain or fear, but from overwhelming love and gratitude. This tiny person who depended on her completely, who would never know what it felt like to be unwanted or invisible or alone. This child who would grow up secure and loved and seen. She's perfect, Jonathan whispered, standing beside Elena's hospital bed and gently touching Grace's tiny hand. She's absolutely perfect. She's ours, Elena said in wonder. We made a family, a real family. 2 years later, they had a son, Samuel Daniel Harrington, 8 pounds even, with his mother's determination visible from his first furious cry. Their family felt complete, and Elena marveled daily at the beautiful chaos of parenthood. She'd worried she wouldn't know how to be a mother, but it turned out love was a powerful teacher. She made mistakes, of course. Every parent did. But she loved her children fiercely, protected them carefully, and made sure they knew every single day that they were wanted and valued and seen. Jonathan was an equally devoted father. He made time for bedtime stories and weekend adventures, never letting work completely consume him the way it had before he'd reconnected with Elena. He wanted to be present for his children in ways his adoptive parents never had been for him. On Grace's 5th birthday, Jonathan and Elena threw a party at the estate. Not an elaborate affair like some wealthy families hosted, but a genuine celebration with bouncy houses and face painting and a magician who made the kids squeal with laughter. Carlos and his family flew in. Amy drove up from Portland. Marcus brought his boyfriend and a painting he'd made especially for Grace. As Elena watched her children play with their friends, watched Jonathan laughing with Carlos while helping kids navigate the bounce house, watched the found family they'd built from broken pieces, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "You okay?" Sophie asked, coming to stand beside her friend. Sophie had remained close over the years, now married herself with a baby on the way. "More than okay," Elena said, wiping happy tears from her eyes. "I keep thinking about that day I saw Daniel's portrait in the study, how my whole life changed in an instant, how the little boy I'd protected became the man who would protect me, how we found each other again after 25 years. In fact, fate," Sophie said simply. "That's what it was. Pure fate." "Maybe," Elena agreed. "Or maybe it's that some connections are too strong to stay broken. Some promises matter too much to stay unkept. Some love is too powerful to be forgotten, even when everything else is lost." That night, after the guests had left and the children were asleep, Elena and Jonathan sat together on the terrace overlooking the estate gardens. The same terrace where they'd sat countless times, talking about everything and nothing, building a life, one conversation at a time. "Do you ever think about what our lives would have been like if we hadn't found each other again?" Elena asked. "All the time," Jonathan admitted. "I think I would have been successful regardless. Built my company, made money, achieved everything society says matters. But I would have been empty, lonely, in a way that no amount of success could fill. Finding you again didn't just give me love, Elena. It gave me purpose. It gave me home." "You gave me that too," Elena said. "Not just the physical home, though that matters, but the feeling of home, of belonging, of being seen and known and loved for exactly who I am. That's what you've given me." Jonathan pulled Elena closer, and they sat in comfortable silence watching the stars come out over the garden. 27 years ago, a scared 8-year-old boy had promised a protective 13-year-old girl that he'd come back for her. That promise had been kept, though the path had been long and painful and full of years where hope seemed impossible. But kept promises, even late ones, had power. They had the power to heal old wounds, to right old wrongs, to prove that love, real love, didn't forget. It waited, it searched, it found its way home eventually. Elena thought about all the years she'd been invisible, all the times she'd felt worthless and unwanted, all the moments she'd convinced herself she was forgettable, that she didn't matter, that she was just another orphan who'd aged out and disappeared into the background of the world. She'd been wrong about all of it. She mattered. She'd always mattered, at least to one person who'd never stopped looking for her, never stopped hoping to find her, never stopped believing that somewhere in the world, his sister from street, Mary's, was alive and deserving of the good life he'd built. "I love you," Elena whispered. "I loved you when you were 8 and I was 13. I loved you during all the years we were apart, even though I didn't let myself acknowledge it. And I love you now, more than I ever thought possible. Thank you for coming back for me. Thank you for keeping your promise." "Always," Jonathan said, the word carrying the weight of a vow. "I will always come back for you. I will always keep my promises. I will always love you, Elena. That's my promise for the rest of our lives." They kissed under the stars, two people who'd started as orphans nobody wanted and became a family that chose each other every single day. Their journey had been long and difficult, marked by pain and loss and years of separation. But they'd made it through to the other side, not just surviving but thriving, building something beautiful from the broken pieces they'd started with. Some people search their whole lives for a sense of belonging, for a place where they fit, where they're seen, where they matter. Elena and Jonathan had found that in each other 27 years ago, in an orphanage cafeteria. They'd lost it for 25 years. And then fate, or luck, or the universe's sense of timing, had brought them back together in a study with a portrait and a chance for a new beginning. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was better than a fairy tale, because it was real, messy and complicated, and full of pain that had to be healed before the happy ending could fully land. But it was theirs, built on a foundation of childhood love that had survived impossible odds and grown into adult love that would last the rest of their lives. Elena Brooks had started life as nobody's child. She'd become Elena Harrington, mother, wife, advocate, and living proof that your beginning doesn't determine your ending. That invisible people can become seen, that broken things can be healed, that promises, even ones made by scared children who had no power to keep them, can eventually be fulfilled if the will is strong enough and the love is real enough. And on that terrace, under those stars, surrounded by the life they'd built together, Elena knew with absolute certainty that she was finally, completely, perfectly home. 10 years later, Elena stood in that same study where everything had changed. The portrait of young Daniel still hung on the wall, but now it was surrounded by other photos, wedding pictures, baby pictures, family portraits showing Elena, Jonathan, and their children smiling together. Pictures of reunions with Carlos, Amy, and Marcus. Photos from foundation events helping other kids who needed what they'd once needed, to be seen, to be valued, to be given a chance. Grace, now 15, was interested in social work like Amy. Samuel, 13, showed artistic talent like Marcus. Both children knew their parents' story, knew about Street, Mary's, and the years of separation, and the miraculous reunion. Both understood they were named for the qualities their parents valued most. Grace and peace, things that had been hard-won after childhoods marked by neither. Elena had recently been invited to speak at a national conference on foster care reform. Jonathan had expanded his foundation to include scholarship programs, mental health resources, and a nationwide mentorship network. Together, they'd helped hundreds of kids age out of the system with support and resources rather than nothing and nowhere. But the work wasn't about numbers or recognition. It was personal. Every child they helped was the child they'd been once. Every kid who aged out with a mentor and a plan was the kid they'd wished they could have been. Every success story was proof that circumstances of birth didn't have to determine circumstances of life. "Mom?" Grace's voice pulled Elena from her thoughts. Her daughter stood in the study doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder. "I'm heading to volunteer at the youth center. Need anything before I go?" Elena smiled at her daughter, this confident young woman who'd never known what it felt like to be invisible or unwanted. "Just a hug," she said, and Grace rolled her eyes with affection but came in for an embrace. "You're sentimental today," Grace observed. "I'm sentimental every day," Elena corrected. "I just hide it better most of the time." After Grace left, Elena stood in front of the portrait that had changed everything. Young Daniel, with his warm brown eyes and shy smile, frozen forever at 8 years old, not knowing the incredible journey ahead of him, not knowing he'd lose everything and gain it back and build an empire and find his family again. "Thank you," Elena whispered to the portrait, to the memory of that scared little boy, to the universe that had brought them full circle. "Thank you for never forgetting me. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for keeping your promise." The little boy in the portrait just smiled his shy smile, and Elena smiled back, her heart full of love and gratitude and the profound understanding that some stories take decades to reach their happy ending, but that doesn't make them any less powerful when they finally arrive. This is the real lesson of Elena and Jonathan's story. Not that billionaires sweep in and save the day, not that romantic gestures solve all problems, but that connection matters, that being seen matters, that keeping promises matters, even when it takes 25 years. That childhood love can survive and grow into something even more beautiful. That family isn't just about blood, it's about choice and commitment and showing up for each other no matter what. Elena Brooks had been nobody's child. She became Jonathan Harrington's sister, then his love, then his wife, then the mother of his children. But most importantly, she became fully herself. Visible, valued, loved, seen, and somewhere, in some orphanage where scared children are hoping someone will choose them, another Elena is taking care of another Daniel. Another promise is being made. Another connection is forming that will survive impossible odds and change both their lives forever. Because that's what love does. Real love, the kind that sees and values and commits. It survives. It waits. It finds its way home. Even when the path is long and the obstacles seem impossible, real love endures. If this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear that they matter, that they're seen, that their story isn't over yet. Drop a comment telling me about a promise someone kept to you, or a promise you kept even when it was hard. Because those promises, those connections, those moments when someone chooses to see us and value us, those are what make life worth living. Thank you for joining Elena and Jonathan on their journey. May we all be blessed enough to find our person, keep our promises, and build lives filled with the love we once thought impossible.